Hello, thanks for checking in. This is AJ Nee from Microsoft. I'm a business intelligence pre-sales specialist. And did you know that we just came out with a new preview release for Power Map? If you go to Bing or your search engine of choice and type in Power Map for Excel, you can go and grab a copy of the add-in. There aren't special versions for 32-bit version versus 64-bit. It's literally just the executable for the installation and a Word doc to get you a little bit up to speed with what's going on with Power Map. And so once you get a copy of the add-in, you'll see in the Insert tab of the ribbon, you'll have an option now to launch Power Map. In prior incarnations, even when we came out with the brand Power BI, we were still using the Geo Flow, the former codename version of the add-in. So if you see Launch Geo Flow in your copy of Office, you're not running the latest and greatest build, so you might want to go and fetch that. One quick note on that front, you might want to consider uninstalling Geo Flow before installing the Power Map add-in. All right. So that being said, here's our little scenario for today. What we're going to do is we're going to take some US Census data. If you take a look at any one of these states, pretty flat data, and they break it out by county, by state, and then you have a bunch of different population counts by demographic profile. We're not going to care about demographics for this particular use case. We're just going to take a look at total population and plot that on a map. And so I might come over here and copy the URL to the shortcut. The way that the census here in the U.S. breaks out data, it's in CSV format, which is pretty easy for us to handle in our tool set over in Power BI. And so what I'd like to do first is I'm going to bring in that hyperlink. I'm going to bring the data in through Power Query first. Now, technically, I could just physically copy the CSV file down to my machine and wire potentially straight into Power Pivot. There's actually a couple of transformations I want to do before I get to the point where I'm plotting points on the map. And so I bring this in. It's not a trivial data set. It's about 300,000 rows worth of stuff, and I think it's spanning to my second monitor. So there's lots of breadth and depth to this data source. And pardon me, clicking on all over the place here. If I take a look at the way that the data source is structured, there's all sorts of noise and different metrics as you scroll from left to right here. Really, the metric that we care about is total population. We're not going to look at the demographic attributes. Clearly, you could make a case for using Power Query and some of the unpivot capabilities to turn this into something that might be interesting for analysis and from a demographic perspective. But really, for this particular case, I'm just going to can all of that, and then I'm going to add a column. There's two things that Power Map is going to want before it tries to take a look at this data. The first is time period. We're going to want to break out an actual date dimension. The Power Map kind of wants a date dimension to work with in order to give you the timeline control down at the bottom. The second thing, and what I'm actually going to do in Power Query, is I'd like to create a new derived column. If I just feed it county names from this list here, it's going to not necessarily give you the greatest results because there's multiple counties and the same county might be in multiple states. You might have for a person that's looking at a U.S. data set, you might start seeing counties from outside of the U.S. start popping up, and probably not desirable in this particular case. And so what I do in this little scenario that I just quickly whipped up is I just come up with a quick custom formula that will concatenate the county and the state together. And what did I do wrong there? I want to remove this column. Remove it, sorry. Spacing out here a little bit. Let's do insert column custom. And we're going to do county name, ampersand, and another ampersand. I probably spaced out as I was doing the syntax. And we do stumble and fumble when we do ad hoc demos at 9 o'clock at night sometimes. Click on OK there, and this is what I was looking for. county and state concatenated into one little column. Power Map's going to like the way that that data looks coming in for all intents and purposes. And so I want to rename that column. I'm just going to call it county state so we know what we're talking about. So no major transformations. I'm going to call this guy census raw population, just so we know what we're looking at here. When we click on done, we're going to actually copy that data down to our local side. We don't need to load the data into the worksheet, but we do want to enable the download. In addition to the data that's flowing into, or ultimately will flow into the model, I also need to fabricate a time dimension. Now, obviously, there are much prettier ways to do this. There are much cleaner ways to do this, but what you're going to find when you, this is sort of my quick solution to solving for the problem. So when you look at the way that the data comes out of the US Census, there's just a single-digit year column. I'm not exactly sure what it relates to because I'm not an expert in US Census data, but for the purposes of getting the timeline control working, I need a true time dimension, and I can't build a time dimension off that singular CSV file that's inbound through that feed. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply take that range and load that into the model in Power Pivot. And yes, it has headers. We can minimize that for the moment. If I go back over to this worksheet, you saw that we pulled approximately 300,000 rows down from the US Census. We're going to load the contents of that US Census data to our Power Pivot model. And you should now see Table 3, which is our, if we want to rename this, this is our time dim, and then we have our raw population. There's a relationship between these two, of course. And we want to make sure that that's established over here. And finally, the only other bit that we have to do in this model is we want to flag this as a time dimension, or what we call a marking as a date table. I'm using multi-dimensional terms on you here. Apologize for that. So by marking this as a date table, now the timeline, the play button, the animation is going to work when we get the Power Map. Okay, so we're going to say it's on that date column. We've got the relationship. We've got the things that we need. Now we can go into Power Map. And so I don't have any scenes created here yet. We'll create the first one as we go through this. And so here you get the 3D map of the world. One of the things that was different, kind of caught my eyes right away, was the fact that this 2D chart option appears to you. So instead of having sort of just the bars and the heat maps and those kinds of things going on, you can use this 2D chart capability to have to plot bar charts and columnar charts on the map if you choose to. I didn't notice this in the last build. I could be wrong. I might not have been looking closely enough when I was looking at the Geo Flow preview, but this concept of having a flat map as opposed to just the three-dimensional map I thought was kind of interesting, or at least caught my eye. I didn't see it in the last version of the add-in. And so here, let's just go through and quickly rattle off the things that we need. So we first need to indicate geography. We're using that composite field, the concatenated county and state working together. And when we do that, you start to see the country of the U.S. starting to fill in with all sorts of blue lines and whatnot. And if I start to rotate this on its axis, you're going to start to see, hopefully in a moment or so, some of these points on the map starting to stick out a little bit more. And so when we start, and the reason why nothing's sticking out at the moment is because we've just plotted the push pins, if you will. We've just indicated location, nothing around the total population metric in which we're interested. That field or that attribute in the inbound comma delimited file is called TOT_pop for total population. I dragged that in as a height. And now you should start to see a little bit of a mess, but you'll see like Los Angeles is pretty big and Chicago is pretty big. You know, those kinds of things are pretty obvious. One of the things that I found useful in a case where we've got lots of density is to go into the formatting for the layer. And there's this option here called thickness. If I go into thickness and I scale that back a little bit, I get a little bit greater degree of visibility going on. Category I thought was kind of neat. I did, like I told you earlier, I kind of ripped out the demographic attributes. That might be something useful if I had unpivoted the data and I could throw something into the category box. In this case, what I'm going to do is take age group. I don't know what these age groups correlate to. It's just a singular key value, 0, 1, 2, 3. But I drag that into categories, and now you get to see how the population plays out by what they're calling their age groups in the US Census. As I start to scroll around here, you get to see that there's a big bucket, for the most part, in these larger towns that's blue, correlating to age group 0. Same thing going on here, presumably around Chicago. And then all the other age groups seem to be kind of small. Right? And finally, the piece that I wanted to leave you with, there was a reason why we went through the fabrication of that time dimension. You're probably thinking the same thing I am. There's a much more glamorous and a much more enterprise way of doing that. This is kind of the quick and dirty approach. So, but by creating the date table in Power Pivot, what I'm able to do now is I'm able to drag this date attribute over to the time box. You wouldn't be able to do this otherwise. And when I drag over here, before marking this as a date table, I'm going to be notified that it's not going to work. And so when I do that, it takes a moment on my machine, but ultimately you're going to get, on the bottom here, you get this timeline control. And if I scroll in a little bit, I can collapse the tour down a little bit. You'll notice in the ribbon there's a couple of options that light up for the timeline. Do you want that on or off? And do you want this date timestamp thingy in the upper left-hand corner to hang around? That's something you can turn on or off. For this case, the time is not really relevant. It's just a 5-year observation from the way I'm reading it. And now, because we've loaded time frame into this map, you should see it's only 5 different changes here, or 4 different changes as you go from period to period. But you did get to see a little bit of the evolution and how the population did get a little bit larger over the course of time. Maybe that's not year-to-year changes. Maybe that's decade-to-decade changes. I'm not exactly sure. Not entirely familiar with the population data set in the US Census, but I'm sure if I digged a little bit further, I'd be able to find out, especially with a tool set like this. So this is just a quick little demonstration of what is possible with the latest and greatest build of PowerMap. Shoot me some comments here on the YouTube site. I'll be happy to answer them as soon as I can, or you can visit me on my blog site. Thanks so much for checking me out. Hope to see you soon. Take care.